My name is Kevin Volbrecht. I'm the director of the engineering department, and I'm going to talk to you today about the lighting study. I do want to emphasize that this is not technically the final document, but we think we're very close. We had a draft document that was given to us several months ago, and we looked at it again and reevaluated how the criteria was being measured and analyzed, and we've come up with a different conclusions on the data since we've done this remeasurement of the data itself. So what I want to preface this, first of all, is that the purpose of this analysis is to establish a set of investment evaluation criteria to prioritize how the city can allocate its funding for installing and/or upgrading street lighting. The analysis considers the criteria and elements that combined together provides an objective, data-driven approach to inform the city's lighting infrastructure, funding, and prioritization. So, number one, it's for public safety. Vision Zero is the mantra that we're marching to in that regard, and this falls within the parameters of the Vision Zero vision. Basic principles, hard to want to walk anywhere when you can't see where you're going. So we want to be able to enhance the citywide lighting levels. We definitely want to establish some minimum illumination levels through an ordinance with the city. And then we have an implementation plan that we want to further investigate so that we can utilize this data to create an enhancement of the city's lighting throughout the city. The methodology and the results, basically we took various categories, demographic criteria, population density, employment density, service area job density, household incomes, whether they have access to vehicles, vulnerable street users, there's crashes when dark, the crime rates, the number of transit stops, the existing lighting in the various areas, how many schools and how many parks. And if you refer to your packets here that I handed out to you, the evaluation methodology and data sources is the table one. It's the first colored 11 by 17, and we can read through that later on. I don't want to get too specific onto this because I don't want to take up too much time on this. I could certainly meet with each of you individually and we can go through this more in depth. And because it's kind of a complex study and there's a number of questions you're probably going to have in reading through it that I think would be more suited to answer in a more individual format rather than to take up the length of time that it might take in this forum. So the scoring results for the lighting criteria, it was put on a map to show ranking the various census tracts throughout the city, and there's 36 tracts that were analyzed in the revised update that we just got last week, and you can see that they're ranked 1 through 36 on this. Most of the areas where the safety issue was a factor, was the conclusion, are east of 95. You can see where the reds and the oranges are, and that's what this conclusion, the conclusion of this study shows as of this moment as far as where we need to focus our attention on. And if you look at the other 11 by 17, which has just a tabular ranking of all the various tracks, and you can see the various data, the numbers that were used, and the scores that were associated with those from a 1 to a 4, depending on the scoring ranges that were listed on that previous table, whether, what percentages gets a 1 and what percentages gets a 2 and a 4. And so you can see that there are, the highest score was a 34, and the lowest score was a 13. There's a number of census tracts that have above 30 or above, and what we intend to do with this is to fully vet the data again, make sure that we're good with this, and finalize this report. And then we're gonna dig deeper into each of these various tracks, starting at the first one and going down the list. And we're gonna look at what the existing lighting is in those areas and where we need to make some improvements to that, if we do need to make those improvements. And then we will look at how we can be able to do that. The other thing that's going to come about from this report is we want to establish minimum illumination levels for the city through the ordinance. And we're looking at major arterials, other roadways, sidewalks, shared use paths, and the Florida Department of Transportation context zones, which are 3 to 5, which is basically rated upon like high-density areas. We use the reference standards from the AASHTO, the Illumination Engineering Society, and FDOT, and again, develop a draft lighting ordinance that will be presented to the commission to establish minimum lighting criteria for the city as a whole. Implementation strategies, as I mentioned, we are going to dig down into the various tracks that were rated high and look at what we have there and what we may need to do in order to improve the lighting in those particular tracks on a street-by-street basis. But in the short term, what we've done so far is, like for instance, on Alabama Avenue, we found that there was some issues there, and we ended up adding 2 light fixtures on existing poles on that street, which improved the condition there pretty significantly. And in the downtown alleys, about a year and a half ago, we added some lights that actually faced the walls of the alleys to improve the lighting there for when people would walk down the alleys, and so it reduced the shadows that were on the alleys. So we've utilized some of the money that we had to do some of those things. In the midterm, what we currently have available, we have a 1% sales tax allotment. We have about $2 million of that left. And again, evaluating the priority areas and looking at replacing fixtures on existing poles. That's a relatively inexpensive exercise that can provide great benefits. Long term, we want to look at what our capital improvement program will support as far as overall lighting improvements in the city, and perhaps get some grants to help fund that as well. And then, of course, the citywide maintenance program between the city and the FP&L is maintaining all of the city street lights that we have and making sure that they're all operational and working at their best capacities. I noticed that there's some people here from the Washington Road area, and I wanted to speak a little bit about that because I know that they've had some concerns about their street. We have a project that's going on right now on Washington Road where we're going to actually do some underground utility replacements and some streetscape, and they have made some requests that we also provide some enhanced lighting in that area.
Kevin, before you move there,
Yes.
let's go back a few slides, because I know we're doing this analysis. And the one thing I didn't see is where we're assigning a price tag. I know we're ranking them in terms of the needs and stuff, but I think part of the data that we need to have as policymakers is what it's going to cost, not only where the most dire needs are, but what it's going to cost to bring these up to whatever our minimum standards are. Because, as I recall, we only have, what, $2.5 million available for all of the lighting throughout the city?
Currently we do. We have a little less than $2 million available.
Okay, so then we need to, particularly as we're going into budget and looking at projects and priorities, we need to see what the dollars are going to be required to rectify these situations. So I don't know if you're able to come up with that, but at some point in each of those districts, particularly the ones that are most red, it would be nice if we can have some sense as to the cost of bringing them up to code or whatever, ordinance.
Okay, well, part of what we're going to end up doing here is come up with how much money we need to invest. We don't have that figure right now, but we will certainly have that.
At some point, I would like to have
Yes,
that. Okay.
absolutely. That's very important data, absolutely.
It will be more than 2 million.
Well, I'm sure it will be, but I think we have to be very realistic and transparent about what it's going to cost. Now we can talk about Washington Road. See what?
Well, obviously, ideally, we would love to be able to improve the lighting throughout the entire city based on the criteria that that's going to be established based on this. You know, similar to what we do with pavement and everything. We want to figure out what is our target? What do we want to achieve? And then we have to incrementally work towards achieving that. And that's what we're going to be doing with this as well.
And I think as commissioners, you know, we're going to be going into some strategic planning in the next couple of weeks. And this is the kind of difficult decisions we as the policymakers have to work. Listen, on a grand scale, we could put in a strategic plan. We want public safety and improved lighting throughout our city, but there is a price tag that goes with that. And if we pay for that, what do we not pay for? So this is a case in point of some of the tough calls that we have to make even as we start talking about our strategic plan going forward.
So, if I may, I would just like
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
I would just like to talk a little bit about Washington Road. Just because we have the folks here that are in the audience, I'd like to address that briefly. And basically what we're doing is we're doing this project on Washington Road right now with utilities and streetscape. There has been some concern about the lighting that is on that particular stretch of Washington Road from Edgewood to Monceau. We looked at that and we looked at we did a photometric of the existing lighting there, and we found that there are some areas there where the lighting level is low. However, when we look at other data that's also in this particular study, when we look at the crime data, the crash data, you can see it. I've mapped here. There's been 3 reported crimes in that stretch of Washington Road in the last year. There was a burglary at a house. There was a larceny at somebody's property where somebody stole something from the property at some point, and or some type. And there was also a forced entry burglary at another residence down there on the south end. The ones that I showed here are the ones that occurred at nighttime. There was about 18 crimes overall in the last 5 years, and I just wanted to show the ones that occurred during the nighttime. And I'm not a police officer, but I don't know what the relevance is between somebody breaking into a house and what the street lighting level is, or somebody stealing something from somebody's yard. But in looking at the crime data and looking at the crash data, there was 6 crashes in the last year. 4 of those were at night. 2 of those, one of them was an alcohol-related incident. Another one was a pothole-related incident due to a utility break. And then the other 2 were basically on this curve that's between Royal Palm and Roosevelt, and there may have been a number of factors that may have contributed to that. But looking at this particularly, this currently has a score of 31. It's happened to come out ranked 9th in the overall study as it is right now. Technically, it's tied for 6th place because there's a number of tracks that have a 31 score. But what we're thinking of doing here in the short term is we want to do a study and see if we actually change out the fixtures on the lights that are there from what are predominantly 30-watt metal halide fixtures to potentially 55-watt LED fixtures. And we can do that as a combination between FP&L and the city, because some of the poles are FP&Ls and some of them are the cities. And we can get FP&L to do that, and then we just pay the difference in the energy bill. And our city crews can do the ones that are ours, and we can do that relatively inexpensively. But I want to have our electrical engineer do a study on that and see what the lighting levels are going to be, because we don't want to create it where it gets to be too bright, and then it becomes another complaint problem, and we don't want to do something that isn't going to be satisfactory to the community. And we will certainly meet with the community group again in the near future, and we can go over this more specifically about what we're going to do. There was a discussion or a concern about potentially changing all the lights out to a different type. I'm not going to address that right now because that's another issue altogether. But just in looking at the lighting levels there, I think there's some short-term things we can do to possibly improve that. And I want to make sure that if we do that, if we do go that direction, that we do it smartly and it will actually make a positive effect and it doesn't cause other problems.
Okay, that's all well and good. Now, where do they rank? Number 6 or
Right
9?
now, they're ranked number 9.
Okay, so what do we tell the people who are 1 through 8 that may have needs, and why aren't we addressing their needs? I mean, that maybe that's a rhetorical question, but it's a question that we as policymakers have to deal with. It's nice to address number 9, but now I got to. What do I tell the neighborhoods that are ranked 1 through 8, and what are we doing for them, Mr. Kelly?
Let me see.
It's on. It's on.
Okay. Yeah, I can answer that one because
Okay.
I made the commitment that we would look at some of these hot spots around the city. But when I made that commitment, it was in the context that we would do something that was impactful yet not costly. Okay, and so we've already done something on Alabama and 2 or 3 other streets where the neighbors have come in and said, "Hey, look, we have we have a situation. We looked at it from a standpoint. Can we do something that's small that would be impactful?" And they're like quick hits. Okay, so we've been doing that elsewhere. So I committed that we would look at this as well, and if we could do something that would be inexpensive. Changing out bulbs is something that's not as expensive, and we'll continue to look at quick hits around the city is what our proposal was.
Well, that's all well and good, and you don't have to answer me now, but at some point, if we're talking about what we're doing here on whatever's ranked number 9, then give me a list or give the commissioners a list of what we've done in those neighborhoods that are ranked 1 through 8. All right, because I don't want to start, commissioners, we cannot run this city reacting to the squeakiest wheel. Otherwise, we're going to be chasing our tail. And so if we're doing something for the neighborhood that's ranked number 9, and listen, I wish we could do it for all of them, then let's make sure that we are informed of whatever some of these quick hits were in neighborhoods ranked 1 through 8. Okay? All right, commissioners, Commissioner Rawls, did you have a?
Certain. I think that community number 9 illuminated an issue that we have in the city, because it wasn't until they made a request to address their lighting that we ever came up with a ranking system. Am I right?
No, that's not true. We had the lighting
we've been
study in
working on
place
this now
before that.
for well over a year.
Yeah.
So
Well, the question then becomes, who determined the methodology?
the methodology was determined based on industry standards of what you would normally look at for what would contribute to safety factors, and that's what
So how do you determine vulnerable street users?
That depends on what type of people that don't have cars. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic, and there's a number of other factors in there. But
And so there's data on that?
there is some discussion on that in the study itself that I provided you a copy of. And then
I
we
never
could
received a
also
copy.
get further into that if when we could meet with you individually and go through the whole thing with you, so
Okay.
you can have a better
I never
understanding.
received a copy of a study, but at any rate, so as we got community number 9, approximately based on the budget that we have now, how long will that take before they get their lighting?
I can't answer that question for you because I don't know what the extent of the lighting improvements we need to do in track number 1 at this moment.
Okay.
So,
So we need to figure that out first.
yes,
huh?
we do.
All right.
And before we do anything on Washington Road, we're going to look at what we need, what we're going to need to do in the first track, and then go down that list. And we're going to evaluate what needs to be done there specifically, and see what we can fund and do. And we'll just keep going down the list until we run out of money or out of time or whatever we.
So when we say we've done a lighting study, we've done a partial lighting study, is what you're telling me, right?
Well, we've done a study that demonstrates what the safety issues are in the city. go back to the very first slide, really. The punchline is that when streets have low illumination at night and visibility is limited, those streets' functions become diminished due to perceived or real safety issues. And the number of factors that were considered in developing the conclusions in this study as it stands right now dictate that all of those things considered, track number 1 is the least safest area that needs to be have the most attention right now. That's the priority area. And then it goes down the list from there. So it's not just lighting. Lighting is what we want to ultimately improve, but it is the number of other factors, people that walk to work, people in different industries, how much the income is, whether they have cars, whether there's parks, buses, all those factors. It's not just a matter of just strictly lighting. It's about what the people are doing in the city. And in order to encourage walking down the street, we want to make sure that we have lighting levels that will allow for that to take place where people can feel comfortable doing that. If there's not a lot of people walking on the street, then that gets factored into what the analysis provides. And so it's relatively complex, and I think it would probably be worthwhile if I sat down with each of you and went through this with our consultant that prepared the report, and we could explain this in very...
If I may, I have both number 1 and number 9 in my district. Okay, so we're going to be positive and make sure that number 1 at least gets some lighting, and that we will look at the study to determine, and the budget to determine when we're going to get some in number 9, so I can tell my constituents when they can expect some lighting.
Yes, we will.
Thank you.
But I think also, I'd like to see, before we stroke the check for any of this, the list, and I don't know if you're doing a budget for the full $2 million that we have left, but I'd like to see a detailed list of what we're doing in each of these areas, price tag associated with it,
Okay.
so that we all know what's going on in all the districts that are affected before any of those projects gets any money. I think that's only fair. Madam President.
Thank you, Mayor. And Mayor, to your point, as Kevin's point, I appreciate that we're looking at the city as a whole, because I think that you brought up some great points. Lighting is not just about the lighting, but all of the safety issues, all of the walkability issues that we're facing in our city. But I do want to clarify something, because I recall that this came up in this particular neighborhood in Section 9, and you referenced it. It came up because we were doing some utility work on that road as well. And I appreciate that the residents and staff were looking at, okay, does it make sense to do this work at the same time so that we're efficient with our resources? And I just want to clarify, because I think we discussed this at a commission meeting, that you're saying the cost would not increase if we do this lighting at a different time rather than doing lighting upgrades at the same time?
No, I believe that if we wanted to go and do something with lighting in the future, that we could do that with very little disruption to the work that we're going to do anyways.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on, did you finish your presentation, by the way?
I am done, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Actually, just what are the next steps? We've talked a lot about getting budget numbers, and
That's good. That's good. Fair
but what are the next steps?
The next steps are, we're going to go through and we're going to really review this latest version of the study and make sure that everything is good. We don't need to redo, recalculate, reanalyze something. We want to make sure all the data has been analyzed fully accurately. Once we get to that point, we're going to the consultant is going to work on preparing these the ordinances for the minimum illumination levels, and then we will start looking at each of the various tracks based on the priorities that are concluded, and see what the actual specific lighting needs are in those particular areas, and then come up with a comprehensive plan on how we're going to address those on a street by street basis. But that's going to take a while. It's not going to happen next week. It probably
Yes.
takes several months.
Okay,
Commissioner
yeah,
Ross.
that was my question. What's the time frame?
I'd say probably, you know, we'll start looking at this now. I think it's probably going to be another month or so before we come up with some ordinances for the lighting levels. And the in-depth analysis of the various areas is going to probably take it's going to probably take 6 months.
So 9 months, we should be ready to go.
Theoretically, yes.
Can we do parallel tracks? Can we work on the ordinances while we're also looking at some of these quick hits?
Yes, definitely. I want to get started looking at these quick hits right away. I'm just saying before we ever come to a final conclusion on what
Right.
we're going to do, it's going to be about that long. But we'll look at it right away, definitely.
Thank you.
We're not going to sit on this for
Thank you.
more than 30 minutes.
I know, because some of these neighborhoods are in dire need of lighting,
Absolutely.
and the sooner we can get there, the better. All right?
Okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Very fine report.